Şimdi yatırımcılara ulaşmak için yeni kanallar neler diyeceğiz. Zira önemli bir oturum daha başlayacak. Roadshow'lar nasıl organize edilmeli? Değişen dinamiklere nasıl uyum sağlamalı? Şimdi bu ve daha fazlasına cevap verecek panelimizde sıra, söylediğim gibi. Avrupa ve Kuzey Amerikalı yatırımcıların küresel kurumsal erişim yaklaşımları, MiFID 2 etkisi ve satıcı tarafta değişen dinamikler. Başlığımız bu. Sizler biliyorsunuz bu teknik dönüşümü. Benim için şu an yabancı ama biraz sonra ben de öğreneceğim. Öncelikle panel moderatörü LFDA, küresel büyüme amaçlı hisse fon yöneticisi David Rose'u sahneye davet ediyorum alkışlarınızla. Ve diğer değerli isimler, panelistler. iPro yönetici direktörü Andreas Pozovak, alkışlarınızla. The Bank of New York Mellon Türkiye temsilcisi Cihat Takunyacı'yı da huzurlarınıza davet ediyorum yine alkışlarınızla.
Up. I thought I'd take a few moments just to introduce myself. I'm David Ross. I am an American, currently based in Paris. I have 30 years of investment management experience, managing emerging markets, global funds, and that makes me a conference organizer's worst nightmare, being an American with a microphone and a captive audience. But I guess the only thing worse would be if I started tweeting. But we'll stay away from that. A couple of points that I wanted to make from some of the things that I've heard before we get started. And this is some advice for governments and companies. I've heard a lot of blaming of speculators and activists, and at various times short sellers people get complain about. The international financial interest rate cartels get blamed for things. Listen, they are never the cause of your problem. They exist only because you've created the problem. And if you don't fix your problem, you're going to continue to face this issue for a long time. So quit complaining. Going back to the previous panel, I don't know, is Amani still here? Oh, there you are. You had some great points. I just want to touch on a couple of them. You mentioned access to senior management. It's really not important to us investors. We all know the CEO doesn't really do anything, and he probably even knows less than that. If we have meetings, bring us the people who are really doing the work. Project managers, product leaders, those are the ones who tell us what's going on in the companies. Secondly, ask yourselves as investor relations professionals, what is it that investors don't understand about our company? And then bring that to the meetings and tell us that. You know, we know the financials. The worst thing you can do is to bring along the last quarterly presentation. We've already seen that. Give us something different to see. Investor days, room for improvement, Amani said. Yes. The best investor days, again, keep the CEO and CFO out of it. Give us education presentations. The best investor days that I've had are companies that will spend 6 hours going over a new product that they're doing and why it's important. That's the thing that I don't understand. Teach me that. Is Audrey Arnaud still here? Oh, Audrey, I challenge you to follow me on LinkedIn. And the reason is everybody who has followed me on LinkedIn knows what happens to me when I go to one of your airports. In fact, I have to show you, I have this certificate from the Paris airport for all the bad things that they've done to me. 50 euro gift certificate. Tried to use it yesterday. Nobody would take it. Thank you. Somebody mentioned an investor relations app. Don't waste my time. I don't have enough space on my phone to be checking out every company's app, so that's useless to us. What is important on your website, especially for Turkish companies, give us an organizational chart. Everybody has lots of subsidiaries that own other subsidiaries and have percentages of other subsidiaries. Put it out there so I can figure it out what it is that you actually have without blowing my mind. We're not smart people, fund managers. If we were, we'd be doing something real with our lives. So make it easy for us. Most valuable resource is my time, so don't waste it. Second most valuable resource is my attention span. It's very limited. So try to make things as easy as possible for me as quickly as I can. And finally, with the MiFID II rules, don't expect that we will all attend the same conferences. It used to be, yeah, everybody went to the same Citibank conference. Well, in today's world, I have to decide whether I'm going to work with Citi or JP Morgan or Deutsche Bank. So we're not all going to be at the same conference, so don't expect to see us there. And with that, we'll enter into our MiFID discussion. And I'll let Andreas kind of give a brief background on himself. And then I want him to answer the question, for both of you actually, how has MiFID II changed the way you or your clients are doing business?
Yeah, thanks, David, for the open and direct words. I think it's great to have actually a fund manager there who gives a very direct perspective about what's happening. I'm Andreas from iPrio. I think a lot of people have been in touch with us, and we have actually focused on the developments around MiFID for the last couple of years because they affected and still affect a large part of our client base. So for one, corporates, but for the other parts, the banks and brokers, which are also clients of iPrio, and the institutional investors. And how has it changed our business or what we do? Well, for us, it's actually positive as iPrio, because the more uncertainty there is, the better it is for us as an independent company. But what we've seen, and I actually like to throw this back to you, I think what we've seen is that specifically for, does it work? Yeah, specifically for the smaller actors, it's a huge problem. And I mean, no large cap does really care or see a lot of differences for MiFID. Not a lot of things have changed. Not the large brokerage houses. There's not a lot of change that we see there. For investors like Fidelity or Capital Group or BlackRock, there's not that much change. But where it really hits and where we see a lot of different trends is for the small boutiques, the small issuers, like some of them are here in Turkey, and the small institutional investors. It's a big burden. So I think there is no general trend, but one thing can be said, MiFID is a pain in the neck for especially the smaller parts of these stakeholders. And the question would be, how can they access someone like yourselves? Because you mentioned yourselves, you're not at every conference, but I know a lot of our clients, and we try to help them with that, is they try proactively to go out there and gain access, and it's virtually impossible. They don't get the access that they had. Sell side is shrinking. The sell side analysts are, getting less and less. They move to the buy side. Corporate access teams are built up, but especially for smaller companies, even though they might try, it's very difficult to actually engage and get the access out there. So that has changed our business because it's a completely different approach. And even if you have companies that do invest, and I think that's one thing that is very, very clear, MiFID is a pain in the neck. There is shifts within the industry, and one thing is clear, issuers, most of you guys are working for companies, have to invest in a certain set of resources. Either you do it yourself, try to engage more yourselves, or you pay someone to do it, or you partner with someone. But that's the thing that we can see because it's not a pure trend across the regions, etc. So I'll keep it there for the moment and maybe have Gia add to that or you. There's lots of things we can talk about, but let's see if what you have on that.
Sure. Thank you very much again, David, for the introduction. For those who don't know me, my name is Cihat Takunyacı. I'm running the Turkey office of BMI Malın Istanbul. BMI Malın is the oldest bank in the US, 1784. It's very old. So one of the discussions that if the entities may survive or not, but it's surviving. The reason I'm here is actually I supposed to be not here, but one of my friends, Laura Liley, should be making this the panel. She couldn't because of her plans change. But this is the second year, and I'm having some questions about: is there really a Laura Liley, or that's something I made up? There is really one. Hopefully next year, if we can have such a survey or similar thing, I'm sure she's gonna happy to join us. But what I'm trying to add up on the MiFID 2 is my bank is running certain surveys, questionnaires to the client base. We are closely working with asset managers, broker dealers, all the names within the investment cycle, what we say, and ask certain questions and follow up the trends, what's going on in the markets. And we have the chance to see the trends. So the points I'm going to share is actually what they see in the business, what's coming, and what kind of reaction they do. One of the most visible reaction of the IR teams is actually they try to name the wishes more than used to be before. For example, when we compare 4 years ago the percentage of their involvement, direct involvement, or the selecting the names to visit, the names they put forward increased from 19% to 38% for the last year, this number. So this trend shows that they try to control the investor base on their own. So we believe that this is an impact of MiFID 2, and because the brokers will have less chance to introduce them the certain names, so they try to control this process. Second thing that also I think we see a change with the MiFID 2 is what we see is a contradiction. We plot, because of our data, we plot the most visited countries or the regions for the road shows, and also put the total size of the equity under management as a number. But rational says that the expected result should be the points, the most visited points should be also the ones that the largest number of assets under management should stay. When we look at the map we brought out of 20 locations, it actually runs for the first 4 or 5 locations, like New York, Boston, etc. But there are some contradictions. For example, what we see, for example, in Texas, it is number 9th in terms of the equity asset under management. The number of global road shows executed over there is just 17, so there's a big gap. Stockholm, it's ranked number 12 in terms of the equity under management, but the number of the road shows presented over there is just ranked 20. So what we believe, this kind of involvement of the issuers directly will also kind of smooth out these differences. These are most probably the reason the organizers actually have more benefit to pick up these locations rather than the issuers. So this will be also, I believe, a positive impact of the effect of the MiFID 2. Another thing that we asked the issuer about the MiFID 2, about how they feel with what's coming, 42% of the global respondents that thinks that the sell side changes, and that will also affect the future of IR. So they have a worry about it, and we see among the regions, Western Europe seems most worried, We don't know the background, but that's the highest percentage of response, almost 60%. They're worrying more. So there looks like they're worrying, but they're not also acting at the moment. They're just checking the developments. So these are the introductory things I can share. I also have some other facts that we can discuss.
Can I just follow up on that last point? You mentioned that it's going to change how investor relations departments work. How do you see that change evolving?
Indeed, because again, when we compare, again, we have a survey we're running last 20 years. That become every 2 years we collect the data. When we see the responders and compare all the timeline, there's really a big change in all regions as well. So it started, but what we see, it become more institutional. It become a science. That's the most visible. That means IR officers are trying to do in a scientific way compared to the 20 years ago, and follow up to the trends and to try to respond at the same time.
Andreas, do you have a thought on
Yeah,
that?
well, we actually also spoke with tons of institutional investors. We also published some paper last week on MiFID, actually, because we did a study last year. We wanted to check in what is the effect for you as an institutional investor community, and it was a couple hundred answers. And you know, it really depends on who you ask. If you ask the institutional investors based in the US, 95% say, well, no change. Nothing has changed. MiFID, I mean, we don't care. The large investors, they ring fence their European assets and they deal with MiFID. But you know, what has changed for them is that they have continued the trend to build out corporate access teams. So some of you might have experienced that you have been contacted directly much more frequently by institutional investors from abroad. And their expectation is to be contacted by IR teams directly without using a brokerage house. So, you know, that has been going on already for years, and it's just intensified. And by the way, who is going to be in those corporate access teams? A lot of times it's historic sell-siders that have been going to the buy side. So that's with the institutional investors that come out of the US. And there is actually a big opportunity, in my personal opinion, for you as investor relations officers, because if you manage to proactively reach out to them and be consistent to reach out to them, it's a huge pool of capital, and you build trust in an environment that is now, not when it's going up. You know, when it's a little bit shaky and you're able to continuously have the dialogue as an investor relations, that's a huge opportunity. When you ask the European institutional investors as a whole, that's at least what they tell us, they've seen a significant change, some of them. I mean, and I would ask actually for your opinion in a second, but you know, we see everything. We see institutional investors that have said, this is the biggest pain I hated, especially the smaller the institutional investors become, because it's a cost base all of a sudden. They all of a sudden have to deal with their relationships with the brokers, or they have to build up a corporate access team themselves, which costs money, or the fund managers have to deal with access with you. So a lot of these investors are really annoyed and pissed. And what the problem is that the sell side within a lot of the European countries doesn't show a clear trend when it comes to transparency for corporate access or for sell side costs, which is the reason why we have MiFID, right? The regulator wanted to make it transparent. So you see brokers like JP Morgan offering a package for corporate access and research for 10,000 for one issuer, and the same thing costs 70 or 80,000 for the other issuer. And hence, there is no real market that is currently evolving. Hence, a lot of investors are confused or are irritated and are trying to find the trend. So one thing I can say from the institutional investors in Europe, where there's also a large pool of capital, and you mentioned Stockholm and other of these, I would call them secondary markets. Again, I think it's important for IR to identify how can I touch base with these institutional investors and what are their trigger points. Are they still using brokers? Are they open to be contacted by us directly, which is generally a good thing, right, and is expected? And I've spoken with some of you out there, you know, there is different trends out there. You have satellite roadshows. You go to Wood in Prague, and you have some people have to pay, some haven't, some do off-site meetings in a hotel, and it works quite well. For some, it doesn't. Hence, that's the problem that we currently see, that there is no real trend, and we expect to actually come to see this with the renegotiation process now for the next year. Institutional investors have to renegotiate their packages, and a lot of them expect to have a clearer picture early 2019, which again gives you opportunity to identify the trigger points. Go direct, be proactive with the brokers, try to maybe do something independent and pay for it. There's other solutions like that as well. One thing is for sure, the more proactive you are as investor relations, in my opinion, the better it is. And that's the pure IR function anyway, to be the communicator to the outside, but also to the inside, so that your management understands that this actually costs something.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the one thing that MiFID II is doing is it is disintermediating the sell side analysts and brokers from the process. So there's a void there, and somehow it needs to be filled. From our perspective, it's better if the IR is willing to step in and fill some of that vacuum. I'd be interested in the opinions on the panel here. One of the expectations of MiFID II was that we'd see the rise of the independent research provider. Are you seeing any of that pick up some of the slack? My suspicion is no, but...
Well, I think, I don't have an answer on that, but I have an opinion on that based on what we see. So what we see now is that there's so much cost pressure from the big banks and brokers that they basically give out research for free or very low money, which basically makes it impossible for independent research to really survive in the end, unless the independent research or any research is of such high quality that everyone wants it. And there is actually examples of that. If there is a research company in the Netherlands which is called The Idea, which is basically any institutional investor investing into Netherlands will buy The Idea research because it's so good. And so added value. The problem is all the sell-siders run away, and the analysts that remain have to cover more stocks. So the argument is that the quality of the research very likely does not go up. So, not sure. What we think will happen is that there will be a concentration, that brokers and sell-siders will look at their niche, and I think that's also the opportunity for companies here in Turkey to look at a certain country, to become specialized in research for Turkey or for certain sectors that you are just focusing so much on that you become better than anyone else, and then institutional investors will buy for it. And we've seen some examples of that in parts of Europe, but what we also see is that large banks actually put so much pressure on everyone else. I mentioned JP Morgan giving away full access for retail clients for $10,000 for all research. Morgan Stanley, Goldman. So there is definitely a lot of pressure from the large to the medium or to the boutique that will happen, and we'll see what happens. And just one more thing, what we also see, and this might be an idea for the stock exchange here or also for TÜYİD, we see markets like, well, actually Austria. I'm Austrian, so I work with the stock exchange there, or Switzerland or Germany even, where the same problem exists for small and micro caps. They don't have research anymore. They are not covered, they lose access. So what has happened is that there is some initiatives that, for example, the exchanges or some other association is actually subsidizing research that the issuer cannot influence, but you can pay, and then you will be selected. For example, in Switzerland, it's a stage program. I'm a microcap issuer. I want independent research. I want access. I can pay for it, and then one of 5 well-known brokerage houses will cover me and will give me access to their clients, and that has worked very well to actually get some kind of research going for a limited amount of cost. But you can argue that it might be worth it if you're covered by Kepler or whatever, and they take you onto their clients and you pay for it. So there is certain models that are out there that actually are working quite well, but again, it will cost something.
Yeah. What I can add again through the midpoint study that my bank conducted on the sell side they expect, or the participants share that there will be a broad reduction of coverage, lessened services, including commentary from recent Australian conference, less long-only meetings, increased hedge funds, lesser number of meetings overall, non-deal roadshows, again similar the previous one, less meetings, focus on only tier 1 cities, New York, London, Boston. Again, it may not fit for all issuers the targets. That's the expectation coming from the survey. In terms of some of the practices involved in the US, regardless of the regulation, continued fee pressure and outflow of passive strategies causing investors to be increasingly expense conscious. That's also something expected. There will be like focus on platforms available to support IR in order to manage the cost side. But again, these are most of the workflow solutions related, what they see. And IR still maintain a robust database as a unit, maintain regular and consistent contact with shareholders. Many bulk email distributions are restricted, by the way, so there'll be, again, some limitations, and these are generally rejected by investors or servers at the moment. In terms of the Turkish clients, again, the similar things expected. They likely have the same difficulty as an emerging market country. As we know, some of the emerging market conferences already cancelled, so that trends will continue. But what we hear from overall IR teams or expectation, IR now will be more on the driver's seat rather than someone to be guided. That's the summary of the new environment.
Okay. We've mentioned a lot the institutional investor perspective and investor relations. How about for the individual investor? How do you think IR professionals should be handling that question?
You mean retail investors?
Yeah, and the large individual, the retail, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I think...
Because they mentioned earlier today how important that retail investor is to the Turkish companies here.
Well, I think retail investor relations has always existed and has always been a problem to some degree, because how do you get, in some countries or in some issuers you have 10, 20, 25% held by retail. How do you really access that? I don't have a very good answer for Turkey, because I know, or at least I've been told, that it's a very actively traded market, both on the retail side and on the institutional investor side. There's been, you told me actually before that the holding periods are very, very short by local investors, whereas institutional and the international investors hold much, much longer. So I think some of our clients have had very good experience with investor days where they also invite high net worth individuals, or they actually work with the banks and brokers to try to access the retail community. And I know in some of the other countries, the element of social media comes into play. I mean, it always depends on what kind of sector you operate in. If you're in Adidas and a consumer good company, you have a much better story to tell to retail investors than if you are, I don't know, working in a different sector. But I think the element of social media should not be underestimated when it comes to retail access. I'm not sure if it's possible, but in some legislations, you're actually able to access and contact your your retail investor community through the share registers or the regulators. I don't think that's possible here, but you will know that better. Yeah, that I think that would be our case.
Yeah, what I can add on this, the conversation is locally we have a problem in Turkey, as summarized in the previous panel on the IPO side, that the local investor, retail especially, has very short investment period, and their previous experience hinders them to invest long term or with a similar view what we see from the foreign investor side. So that's a big issue, big problem, obstacle to overcome, to increase the local retail investor piece. And I think it's gonna take some time, some education, even financial literacy required for Turkey. So I'm not very optimistic on that front. When we look at the foreign investor side on the retail piece, what, for example, as BMI Mellon took some of the proposes a solution is the use of deposit receipts. When it becomes level 1 or level 2 in a publicly traded way, it becomes also accessible to retail in US or other markets. But the selection preference level are different. It may not be as high as we can see in other towards other markets or developed markets, but at least it offers a solution, especially if issuer has a known brand name, like let me give from Turkish Airlines, for example, that people see all over the world. They may also look for option to invest in their home market with a different form if they see the opportunity, they like the story. But overall, I think for a while, this will be limited for institutional investor base, at least for some time.
Okay. I think we're running towards the end here. Just kind of as a final question, what advice do you have for the professionals in the audience, especially thinking out over the next 5 years, if they want to develop into, really a top-notch, high-quality investor relations department?
I'm a big fan of Warren Buffett, and when he talks about access and investment, it's all about trust. It's about relationship. So you build relationship and trust over time. You can ruin it in 5 minutes. How do you? Doesn't even have to be in investing. Build relationship, right? So you can only do that proactively, and you build it in a crisis, or it actually goes much better when it's difficult. When everything goes up, no one really cares. Everyone just buys. So actually, I think it's a huge opportunity. MiFID is a pain in the ass, but it's a huge opportunity for anyone who takes it seriously and has the means, the resources, the power to be proactive now. Because chances are a lot of your peers are not. And I mean, you could maybe answer that even as an investor, but investors do remember that. You can try to be proactive, understand your shareholder base. So you asked what to do. You have to understand your shareholder base. You have to build your own profiles with external help or whatever about what are the trigger points, who are potential targets that I can reach in addition to what I have, and how can I reach them? You can do it yourself. So you have to get another person, or work with a partner, or work with a broker. But the chances with MiFID are that you can be more in control than you were before. So you have to take advantage of that. So understand your shareholder base, understand what they think about you, understand what triggers them to actually get a meeting and actually to buy you, and then keep doing it, be proactive. So my main thing would be build relationships now and be proactive. Especially, it's a perfect situation if you're a Turkish issuer right now, because a lot of the institutional investors, they might have sold now, but they definitely are interested to hear what's going on with your company and what's going on here. And if you're able to build the relationship, they will remember. If you're trustworthy, they're much more willing and they feel much more comfortable to invest in you when the time is right. So be proactive. You have to invest some resources. And I think in 2-3 years, this will pay off much more than what you have invested now.
What I can add, again, as I mentioned, I think the IR officers or IR teams should take the driver's seat, definitely, more than it used to be before. Also, engage more with the senior management, even board level, to educate more the necessity, the positive effect having their support in this process. But as summarize, use databases, other tools whenever possible to drive the car with that direction that actually totally set with the management as well as the IR team, so that the shareholder targeting the company's targets totally met, and then drive that direction together.
I'd just like to add one thing because we haven't touched it yet. And what's actually the biggest mega trend in institutional investing over the last couple of years? Shift to passive investors. So it's also true here in Turkey. Now, one other chance is to actually access the passive investor community. You can do that, but you have to do it via different means. It's a different stakeholder group. So one additional opportunity is for anyone here to try to reach out to the corporate governance teams, to the ESG teams within the passive investor community, because some of them, they just track the index and take care of voting, so that's fine, but you will hear a lot from them. But others have a lot of ESG integration factors, like BlackRock, for example, largest investor in the world. And if you have a good ESG sustainability story, which I know a lot of Turkish companies actually do, you can be over-allocated money. A lot of pension funds track that. So that's something that a lot of companies do not do in emerging or developing markets for whatever reason. But this is something you can and you should do also now. So that's actually really important in my opinion. Don't forget the passive investors. Engage with them as well. And if you don't know how, let's get a coffee out there. But this is a huge opportunity as well.
Yeah. I would just add, or actually maybe ask a question of the audience. How many investor relations professionals use a CRM system to manage your... We got one? Couple. As an investor, there's one company that has tracked me my entire career. They will track me and find me at a new employer before I even have business cards. That's the kind of proactivity you want to have with the investor base, because again, you don't want them forgetting about you. You always want to be in front of them because we have very limited attention spans. As I said, we're not really bright people. We don't like to work that hard either. So stay in front of us. And I think that this is an opportunity now under MiFID II, with the sell side being disintermediated, for you to really get closer to your investor base. Okay? I think we're good.
Thank you.